Recording in progress.
A very, very warm welcome. In German, I would say, Willkommen, danke, dass du bei uns bist. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to the 7th edition of the Indian Photo Festival. This is India's longest running photography festival, International Photography Festival. And today I have here with me Ruth Blees, Luxemburg. Her photographic work deals with the representation of the city and the phenomenon of urban, ranging from large-scale photographs to public art installations and operatic mise-en-scène. Ruth, welcome to our platform. And we are very excited to know about your journey and your photographic works. I'll take another moment and introduce you a little more so our audience knows who you are. Ruth's public artwork, Silver Forest, a large-scale tableau showing fragments of urban forests, is cast in photographic concrete on the facade of Westminster City Hall in London. So those of you who are able to go to London, do take a look at Ruth's work at the Westminster City Hall. Her work is also shown internationally, including the solo exhibition Phantom at Tate Liverpool and London Dust at the Museum of London. Her work is held in public and private collections, including the Pompidou Centre Paris and the V&A Museum London. She has created the iconic cover for The Streets, original pirate material, and is a research fellow and reader in urban aesthetics at the Royal College of Art. This talk is being brought to you by Goethe Centrum Hyderabad in collaboration with the Indian Photo Festival. Welcome, Ruth, from both of us, and over to you.
Hello, thank you so much, Jyoti, for the beautiful introduction. And thank you to the Indian Photo Festival and the Goethe Institute in Hyderabad. For me, it's a real honor to talk about my work to this audience. I'm talking to you at the moment from London, and that in a way makes sense because also London is the place where a lot of my work takes place. I'm going to share the screen so you see my work. Okay, few. Slideshow. Okay, great. So what I wanted to try out today and to bring you into my work is to focus on the night. The night is a very important place for me in terms of my photography. And the night not only allows for a different aesthetic relationship to the city, but it's also a space that can be a political space, a social space, but also a space for thinking perhaps differently. As we know, the night has been very inspirational to poets, philosophers, to lovers. But to me, it's also important, as I said, to think differently about the day. So I've prepared a series of manifestos with Caspar Lang-Ebensgaard, who is an urban geographer. In those manifestos, we tried to think about the night as spaces. So here you go. I will read a very short introduction about this to get you into my nocturnal photography. Night has always been a space of alterity and resistance to the conventions and hierarchies of the day. Darkness encourages a different mode of perception, perhaps more reflective, more immersive, more durational. That is why one not only sees differently at night, but maybe thinks differently, knows differently. I like to suggest that through these nocturnal images, that a different nocturnal perceptions can open up the possibility of a distinct form of nocturnal cognition. The spectrum of a nocturnal knowledge could be more curious, more permissive, more associative, more risk-taking, and less hierarchical, and thereby opening up questions around the existing status quo. Darkness allows for different alliances and interactions. This photograph I'm showing you is called Narrow Stage. It's a very banal situation in London. It's the box of a security guard, and by using a long exposure with a large format camera, you get a lot of detail. The colors change, they become heightened, they become suggestive, and the security guard is not present. Thereby, there is an empty space for the viewer to take place in the photograph, to imagine a sort of entry into the image. This work is called In Deeper. So again, the idea of going into something, going into an image, in deeper. This is a quote from the French philosopher Roland Barthes, who said, to get out, go in deeper. So titles are very important for my photograph. They are an invitation to the viewer to enter the image. What you see here is the River Thames in London. And again, the long exposure freezes the river. And the nocturnal illumination of the city creates this golden light, which makes this dirty old river into a river of gold. So photography has this ability to transform the city and make the city into a space not just of the everyday, but of the nocturnal imagination. This is a view. I wanted to show you how the image then enters the gallery. Here it is shown at the Whitechapel Gallery in London in an exhibition called A Handful of Dust. And as you can see, I'm interested in making large prints. So the images have almost a physical presence. And this idea of entering the image is suggested through the presentation. Another early work of mine, this one is called Towering Inferno. I took the quote from a Hollywood blockbuster movie, but what you see here is social housing in London. And I am very interested again in how the camera, how photography can transform a banal, everyday situation such as social housing. In the British understanding, in the media, in the press, social housing was seen as problematic. It was disregarded. And I wanted to transform this modernist tower block through my photographic transformation into a place of possibility, into a place of luminosity, into a place of human activity. We are not seeing the people, we're seeing the structure. And we're seeing the structure here as a place of many lights, many a warmth, a luminosity of energy and possibility. Another work from this series, I chose to point the camera downwards and to get with the speed and the energy of the city. My colors are the result of this long exposure of using film. And when the film is pushed for this 10 minutes of exposure, it becomes quite distorted. And you could say it becomes a sort of hallucination of the city. So it's not about correct colors or a correct representation. It's about pushing what the photographic medium can do to create another atmosphere. Caliban Towers. Caliban Towers is part of my manifesto, so I want to read that to you. This, again, is social housing in London. It's in a borough called Hackney. And Hackney Council had an inspired phase in the 1960s when they named their social housing estates after Shakespearean characters. So here we have Caliban Towers, situating the present moment in history, making the historical present. While the recent naming of the new developments and residential high-rise buildings in London is meant to engender the aspirational economies associated with height, conquest, and ascent. For example, they're called now the Pinnacle, Principal Tower, Altitude, or the Halo. In the 1960s, the council, in its ambitious period of welfare expansion, it drew on high culture through the characters from Shakespeare's comedies and tragedies. But this seemingly innocuous practice had an unsettling charge when a building was named after a complex villain such as Caliban. For the 14-story tower forming part of this estate in Hackney, the council chose Caliban, the rebellious and, in quotation marks, monstrous inhabitant of a far-off island in the Tempest, Shakespeare's play The Tempest. Prospero, the main character, is a prototype colonizer arriving on the island and forces Caliban into slavery. He is accused of rape and tortured with dark, harmful magic. Caliban is an anagram of the Spanish word cannibal, and it's used derogatively here to characterize Carib people during settler colonial times. Shakespeare's Caliban was mortified when he saw his own reflection in a puddle. In the 1960s, this Caliban tower was surrounded by barbed wire and prominent security cameras, which you perhaps can see in the image, which imposed on the wider estate a panoptical system of control and observation. In this photograph, Caliban Towers, the curtain of golden leaves sets the towers on the stage. And the photograph and its titling ask questions about naming, the naming of buildings, but also the titles of photographs. So I want to use my titles, I choose them very carefully to open up a real wide web of associations so we can start reading the image in many different layers. This is in the 1990s, how this work was shown in London. I showed it underneath a bridge near the estate, so it became a public artwork. And I will speak later about my interest in making my artworks public, taking them out of the gallery, taking them out of the book, and putting them into the public sphere. Okay, this is a more recent series in which I looked at the current development taking place in London. We all live in our cities, especially in, at the moment, we see a lot of change, we see new developments. I'm sure it's the same in Hyderabad as it is in London. And these new developments, for me, are an interesting source to investigate with the camera, but also to think further about it. Okay, yes, so I show the construction site, as you can see here. And again, the luminosity and the golden color are used as these transformative tools. And I'm calling this Icarus project. Icarus, the mythical character who falls when he gets too close to the sun. As darkness falls, the daytime city shuts down. Hoardings are firmed up, shutters are rolled down, doors locked up, windows closed tight. The boundaries are reinforced in an attempt to prevent leakage. To avoid the unruly night to seep through the fissures of its maintained surface. Those cold metal barriers for keeping out, away, and at bay become enticing surfaces of potential pleasure and excitement. Their unintended excess that flows and pleads goes beyond strict utility. The gold rush that travels behind those protective barriers of private development and investment lures towards secret passages, providing the inverted maps for our own El Dorado. In the Icarus project, sodium glow turns everything to gold. This work is from the early series about London, which are called Liebeslied, love songs. And in a collaboration with a philosopher, he titled it My Suicides. Again, titles, important here. This one is called A Girl from Elsewhere, which is from a Schiller poem. Now you might ask, what does that mean, the girl from elsewhere? Well, maybe the sort of liquid, fluid, little rivulets going into all directions speak about maybe something more feminine, liquid. And we can talk about that later in the questions if you would like to. Again, the liquid, fluid element of the city. Photography and liquid have an interesting relationship. They bring each, there's a paradox because the camera freezes, but at the same time, the liquid sort of resists that and brings also the question of reflection into play. Liquid reflects just as the camera reflects, and it inverts. This is a tube station in London called Oakwood, and through the reflection and the inversion, Oakwood becomes mood or doom, depending how you're reading it. And again, it becomes an entry point into another idea of the city. This is Cockfosters, another tube station in London. This was part of a public commission by the London Underground, which invites artists to make work for the underground. And I made this series of photographing the underground stations, but showing the signage, their names reflected in puddles. And so this inversion takes place. The work was installed in Heathrow, Terminal 3 or 4. And so it became, when you arrived from the airport and went to the underground, you saw these big images, which was like an alternative map to the city. Here you see it. An important part for me when I make my work is also the question of hospitality and text. So I invited this poet, Douglas Park, for the opening to come and do a reading of a text he wrote about his work. So image and text are important to me, but also to make an event, to create a sort of shared space where people can come together. London Dust. This is a more recent work which looked very specifically at the relationship that photography has with the changing of the city, especially now, through the new digital developments and the use of CGI, where developers or photographers can use pixels to create new worlds, which are no longer linked to the indexical world, but become real imaginary cities. And I wanted to investigate how that relationship between new technology in photography and new developments in cities are interlinked. And of course, London is the perfect place for that type of field study because of all the most recent developments. So this is an analog photograph I took of a CGI poster that was put into the city to advertise the new towers that they were planning and that now have partially been built. But the one in the middle, the pinnacle, the one with the swirl, they started building, but in the financial crash, they had to stop at the 12th floor. Now, what's interesting for us is how, when you put an image like that into the public sphere, is it real? Is it not real? I mean, if you know very well about pixels and Photoshop, you might see some of it's not real. But if you're not such a good reader of the world of the image, you might be seduced in believing this is real. And it doesn't even matter if it's real or not. I think a question of seduction is important. How photography, how the image is a very seductive tool. And so whoever made this CGI knew very well how to seduce the viewer by using the light, how it falls onto the golden tower. And so we are seduced in believing into this future that the CGI developers present to us. But sometimes the reality hits, and in this case, as I said, the financial crash happened and the pinnacle, the name of this tower, could not be finished. And what you see here is, again, an analog photograph I took at the building site, which by now was a ruin. and in the middle of the city, where they got to the 12th floor. And they still had the beautiful CGI on the building side, covering the building side. But at the same time, the dust, the crime, the everyday dirt of the city started to build up, destroying their beautiful image. And I also interrupted the illusion or the seduction by putting in another element, in this case, this heavy sandbag, which is a very common element you find on building sites. And here I used my sort of signature tool of using the liquid to interrupt the CGI. The work was shown at the Museum of London, and you see here again the scale. And also I worked again with writers. In this case, it was Douglas Murphy, who writes about cities, and he wrote short texts which we put on the wall. So we gave the text more space than the images and made the text into a wall work. Okay, maybe I say something else about, okay, London dust. What Caspar Ebensgaard and myself wrote about it. Part of the manifesto series. Cyber crystals are reminders that the mediation of reality, analog, chemical, mechanical, or digital, has never been manipulation, not even distortion, but always construction. When the construction of the pinnacle, the tallest building to crown the cluster of sinister, playfully named towers in the city of London began, CGI images announced the future skyline on the hoarding around the site. A visual insemination, a silhouette adorned with an architectural helter-skelter. In a confusing flurry that honored its name, the financial crash of 2008 forced the construction to a dramatic halt. The aspirational dreams of an architectural Tivoli were left hanging in mid-air up to the 12th floor they had completed out of the proposed 72. While the developers pulled out and the project was scrapped, the design lived on as CGI adverts on the streets. The awkward presence of a future never realized became part of post-crisis living. London dust is an urban trajectory, a reckoning with life among ruins and the realization that eventually everything returns to dust. Okay, good. And this is a very recent work, again, part of this series. And it is called Londonium. Londonium is confusingly ambiguous. It records the Latin name for London, Londinium, the empire before the empire. But it is something else too, something in between. The Tudor font emphasizes this temporal in-betweenness. It confuses time, aesthetics, and science, creating a fertile confusion where other meanings emerge, where one looks again, where one associates and improvises with possible meanings to come. Another time, another sign. Londonium sits in a vertical hierarchy of signs. It is above the inner star, hair, and beauty salon, i.e. the body. It is above the shutters, above the walkways, above the street, and the stone. It is an aspiration, but not just that. Londonium deals with immigration, litigation, and family business, with personal injuries and landlords. These are serious matters that need attending, today more than ever. After I made the work, I returned to the site, I returned to the place, and then a graffiti artist had sprayed, as you can see, criminal on the shutters. So I photographed it again. And I think now the work is complete. The work was then showed as a public billboard here in Glasgow, in London, and here inside a gallery. So it became part of an interior space. And this is Dr. Caspar Ebensgaard going through the work. Good, okay. I don't know how we're doing for time, but maybe I quickly show you my large public artwork in Westminster, and then we can open up for questions. I was invited by an architecture practice called Lynch Architects in London to make a public artwork for a site they were working on. They were building a new development for housing and offices. And while they were doing it, they created a passage through the city. And as part of this passage, this huge facade, which belongs to Westminster City Council, i.e. a public building, became available and needed to be dealt with. So they showed me this site and invited me to make a permanent work for this site. Now, photography and permanence is kind of difficult, especially in the public sphere. And also such a large site, what can one do that in 10, 20 years still looks good, but also isn't just about this moment, but will keep up and be relevant in the future. So I looked at painting, and this is a famous painting by Pablo Uccello, and it's called The Hunt in the Forest. I was very much drawn to this painting because of the use of perspective. This Italian Renaissance painter was really in the avant-garde in terms of developing perspective, but also there is a busy scene going on here, a hunt, and yet we do not see any blood, we don't see any violence. So we're dealing with an allegory. The scene talks about something, but doesn't make it visible. So you have to decipher the image, and thereby it holds its interest to us. On a visit to China in Beijing, I saw this urban forest, a forest in the city, and this urban forest made a deep impression on me because you can see it is not a natural forest, it is very clearly planted, it is a constructed forest, but also it's a forest that withstands but yet shows the signs of the extreme urban pollution that you find in Beijing. And this silver birch tree had a certain type of pattern that was accentuated through the pollution. I took a 5:4 photograph of it. And when I was back in London, I looked for silver birch trees, the same tree as I saw in Beijing, in the city to photograph. And I've found quite a lot of them, especially around Tate Modern. And I photographed these silver birch trees. And this is the mock-up I made and proposed to the architects to put on the site. The architects put me in touch with a company in Ireland who developed a system, they have the patent for it, by which you can cast a photograph in concrete. So this is not a photograph printed on concrete, this is actually cast. So it is a 3D process. You can, when you touch this photographs, you can feel it. This is the panels being constructed in Ireland in the factory. This is Westminster City Hall, where the work was then placed. So you can see I then put this forest, this constructed forest made out of different urban forests, onto the site in Westminster. And the forest speaks about urban pollution, and it speaks about how we relate to nature. And also I placed this sandbag, which you've seen in my earlier work. I placed this sandbag, which I found in London. There's plenty of them on all sites for developments, and put it in this forest and photographed it. And as in the allegory about the hunt in the forest, this sandbag in the forest is a kind of puzzle for me. Why is it there? What does it mean? Who left it there? Are we talking about a crime scene? It brings up many questions. And I thought it was important to insert this element into the photographic tableau for the people to ask these questions. My photographs don't answer the questions, they pose or alert us to these questions. And here you see the work. So, good. Okay, so that is my presentation. And just to end, at the moment I'm having an exhibition in Paris called The Dark Intestine of Nicolas Ledoux, a revolutionary architect from pre-revolutionary France. And if you are in Paris, please do visit the exhibition. It is at Galerie Dominique Fiat in the Marais in Paris. Okay, so I'm now at the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to discuss the work further with you. So how do I stop?
Yes, so Ruth, if you'd like to talk a little bit more about your work, we are happy to listen. It's a very engaging conversation. It's beautiful. So would you like more time, or would you like to take questions at the moment?
I sort of come to the end of my presentation. So if the people have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Sure. So
I'm not sure how long did I talk? I sort of lost track of time.
Not very long. You spoke for about 30 minutes, so that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
No, you did. I mean, I just kept looking at your photographs, and we thought it's a fantastic flow, which I didn't want to interrupt. So I'll bring in the first question. There is Aditi who is in the Zoom room, and she asks, I want to ask you, how did you get the person, place, or thing that is in front of the camera onto the film, chip, or paper just the way you want to do it?
Right. Okay. How do I get the what? I don't understand. How do you get the person, place, or thing that's in front of the camera exactly the way you want on the film or paper? I think with photography, it's not a science. It can be an exact science, but the way I treat photography is not as a science. So there's a lot of chance. And when you work with film and you develop it, you're always really happy that it worked out. So it's a lot of being open for things to happen. So chance, I think, is very important. And I use a tripod, so I am precise and I am prepared, but you never know. With a long exposure, 10 minutes, a lot can happen. Lights go on and off, people might walk through, etc. So it is also about being open for chance occurrences to take place. I think that's really, for me, really important in my work. I hope that helped you to.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure Aditi is happy with your answer. I'll move on to the next question. So, Ruth, we observed that there's a certain warmth about the way you depict night. There is. I see the colors of your night, and then there is beautiful warm yellows. Unlike the other neon colors that I see with the night photographs, yours have a certain warmth about them. So tell us about the choice of your colors to depict night, the way you do.
Mm. So when I started making this work in the 90s as a young student, I also did it from a feminist perspective, because the night is often seen as a place of danger, as a place where women should not be or are not allowed to be. And I wanted to challenge that perception. I really felt strongly that women should be part of the city, should be part of the public space, have a right to be there, and that we should get out of that very strong, domineering thinking that the night is dangerous. So I wanted to create a nocturnal vision that is inviting, that you actually want to be part of. I really wanted to challenge the stereotypes. And that's why I used colors that are warm, that are inviting, that speak of pleasure, that are seductive, to invite also women in, and challenge us to rethink about the night, to rethink about it as a space of possibility. Now, I don't want to undermine the real danger that surely is there, but it doesn't, as we know, a lot of violence against women takes place in the home. So the home is also often a dangerous place. And I think the public space is a shared place, and it's important that we have access to that shared place to be part of it. It's really important. It's crucial. So that's why I chose to do this. And I did it perhaps very much intuitively, because I did it also for myself. I wanted to claim the nocturnal space. I wanted to claim the city for myself. And the camera was my tool to give me license to be out there, spend time there, observe, look, be part of it. So photography in that sense can be a liberating tool, because it gives you permission to be in places which otherwise it's not so easy to be.
Thank you, Ruth. That was a very interesting description. I hadn't imagined that it would also have a feminist aspect to it, but I'm thrilled that you would take the time and space to think of it in this direction. So tell us a little bit about your about how you started your photographic journey, and how easy was it for you to go in this direction.
Well, I started political science in Germany, and then I understood or felt that for me, the question of the image was really important, and it's become even more important. We need to understand images. We need to be able to read them, to deconstruct them, to understand how images are being used. Images are so powerful. We really do know that now, but it's good to teach people about it. So photography courses are important in that sense, not just about making images, but also to read images. So that's why I decided to switch from political science and studied photography in London. This was in the 90s, and I was very lucky because there was a really good scene. There were a lot of other young photographers, my generation, who were thinking along similar lines. So it was possible to build a network and a scene. And I think that is really also crucial that as a young artist, as a young photographer, you need to find your crew. You need to find people who you can exchange ideas with. And we don't live in a vacuum. We are inspired by others and through talking through others too. And when you're being criticized by others, when other people look at your work and critique it, which is really important, you can develop it. So finding your scene, finding your network, being engaged with other people was what made it possible for me to have a career. I really have to honor that and acknowledge that. And I see that still today. It is really, really crucial. And this network, this scene, isn't just other artists. It's also writers, it's philosophers, it's musicians, it's whatever, it's creative, intellectual people who you need to be in discourse, in dialogue with, that will really help to get your work to the next level and to find a support structure, because you need a support structure. And I am supported by the Goethe Institute. And if you think about Goethe, he definitely had his scene. And he was very good in creating a scene around him, inviting Schiller to come to Weimar and various other people. He created a scene and a network to support his production. So, I mean, this is off a tangent, but I do think it is an important aspect of being creative. It doesn't happen on your own. It happens with others.
Yeah, I think that was some great advice for young photographers. In fact, I had been meaning to ask you that question, that what you already mentioned, that maintain a group, have people with similar interests. What other advice would you give to photographers or artists who want to pursue similar work like you do?
That's a difficult one. What would I advise? I just say follow your own intuition. Follow what you are into. If I analyze the work I've done over 2 decades now, it comes from a personal passion and interest. I cannot put it completely into words, but there's something compels you to do certain things, and everyone has something else that compels them. Everyone has their own passion, and your passion might be about, I don't know, might be about rivers, or might be about climate change. So I think everyone has to follow their own passion, and then it will be possible to do the best work you can, because it takes a lot of commitment, determination to actually continue doing it. And as Roland Barthes said, go in deeper. So there has to be a passion behind it that propels you. But I think it's a good moment. People are more and more open to art. People realize that culture and creativity are important dynamos of everything, or of economy, of the body politic, etc. It is recognized. So I think it's always a good moment to be an artist and to be creative. I think especially now, it's a good moment.
Thanks, Ruth. Thank you so much. I'll take just 2 more questions. One of it is something that I'm interested to know in. Which other cities have you shown through your work, and what fascinates you about London itself?
Yes, so I have worked in Paris. I've worked in Dakar in Senegal. So through my work, I had the opportunity to travel. It's given me a great great support. So I've been on many continents, and I have been able to make work in many contexts. So that's fantastic. But I always come back to London because that's the place where I live, which I've got to know the best, and which I think to me is constantly fascinating because it's so rich in history and association, but also it's changing at unprecedented speed. So it's good to be at a place which is not dormant. Although there's something beautiful in working in a situation which is dormant, but this situation is changing. And so you have to be alert and perceptive to see, it presents itself. And I have to react to that. And also there's something about practicality. I live here. It's practical for me. I'm a mother, so it works with my childcare responsibilities to work locally, so to speak. And the local, is always fascinating to understand the local. If you understand the local, maybe one needs to understand the local before one pretends to understand the global. So I'm all in favor of the local, getting to know the local.
Thank you again, Ruth. Yes, I agree with you. A flavor of the local always helps you expand, on what you want to do. So we have one more question in the room. Aditi asks, which photographers influenced you, and how did they influence your thinking, photographing, and career path?
I looked at many photographers, of course, during my studies. I was influenced by my teachers, very much so. Olivier Richaud and Karen Knorr influenced me a lot. But also, if you go back to history, the historical photographs of Eugene Atget are really important. How he photographed the city, how he photographed the streets of Paris, continuously inspiring. Recently, I looked more at Claude Cahun, the French modernist photographer, surrealist. I think the surrealists are, in general, very interesting in bringing together different unexpected moments, challenging us to find another meaning in the image, not giving us all straight in the image, but provoking different unexpected thoughts. So I think the surrealists are important, and also films. Films are important. The films of Cocteau, of Wim Wenders. So I would say not just photography, but literature, the whole music, operas. I think the whole cultural production is one rich field. And I think it's good for young photographers not just to look at photography, but also to look at painting. I showed this painting which inspired my public artwork in London. So it's important to look outside our métier and go further, find different art mediums which can be really showing different ways of thinking then about your own practice. I think the more we do that, the better. Maybe we should have a photography program that doesn't look at other photographs, but just looks at other art forms, and then see what kind of photography comes out of that. So I'm all for opening the canon, to not just look at the photography grades, we know them, but also look outside of the canon. I think it's important. And I might add that in recent years, the canon has also been expanded. We now look at and are familiar with photographers who are not just from the West. That has really expanded our outlook, really important. So new voices have come in, really good. And also we have discovered overlooked practitioners. The canon was very, very narrow, very, very narrow. And that has opened up. And so we have to continue opening it up. Really important.
Thanks, Ruth. Thank you so much for patiently answering all the questions. It was lovely having you with us. For all those who are in Hyderabad, don't forget to catch Ruth's exhibition, which is up at the State Art Gallery of Hyderabad. Take a look, Manifestos of the Night. It's a beautiful exhibition. Her pictures are absolutely stunning. Please take a look at it. For the rest of you around the world, have a good night, and thank you so much for joining us. We hope to catch you for the rest of the sessions at the Indian Photo Festival for this year. Thanks, Ruth, again for joining us.
Thank you for patiently listening to me, and thank you, Jyoti, for inviting me.
Guten Abend, Ruth. Tschüss.
Guten Abend. Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.